The conference chamber of the Galactic Council stretched high above the assembled delegates, its walls made of something that looked like liquid silver but held solid as steel. Holographic displays floated in the air, each one showing the same troubling images: Krythian warships crossing into neutral territory, their weapons tearing through the peaceful settlements of the Velori people. Ambassador Claire Bennett sat in the human delegation section, her hands folded on the smooth table surface. She had been watching this debate for 3 hours now and nothing had changed. The same arguments went in circles while good people died light years away. "The treaty is absolute," the Velori representative said, her voice shaking with emotion. Her species looked like living crystal, and when she was upset, light refracted through her body in painful bursts. "The Treaty of Restricted Arms forbids energy weapons in contested zones. It forbids railguns. It forbids missiles and explosive projectiles. Yet the Krythians ignore all of this." The Krythian ambassador rose from his seat. He was massive, easily 3 meters tall, covered in thick scales that had evolved to stop predators on his homeworld. "We ignore nothing. The treaty only applies to contested territory. We have claimed this space as Krythian sovereign ground. Therefore there is no violation." Claire watched the other delegates shift uncomfortably. Everyone knew it was a weak argument, but nobody wanted to challenge it. The Krythians had one of the largest fleets in the galaxy. Starting a war over legal technicalities seemed foolish. The Arbiter, who served as the Council's judge and mediator, spoke in its strange multi-toned voice. "The Velori have held those colonies for 200 years. The claim of sovereignty is questionable at best." "Then send someone to stop us," the Krythian said, spreading his arms wide. "Oh, but wait. You cannot. Because the treaty forbids the very weapons you would need to fight us." "How convenient." Claire saw her moment. She pressed the button that would signal she wished to speak. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. "The human delegation has requested the floor," the Arbiter announced. Every eye in the room turned to her. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago. They were still the newcomers, still proving themselves worthy of a seat at this ancient table. Claire stood, keeping her voice calm and professional. "Earth volunteers its military forces to defend the Velori colonies." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates shouted in surprise. Others activated their translators repeatedly, certain they had misheard. The Arbiter raised several of its appendages, calling for order. "Ambassador Bennett, humanity is aware of the treaty restrictions, yes? You understand what you are offering?" "We understand perfectly," Claire said. "No energy weapons. No railguns. No missiles. No explosive projectiles. The treaty language is very specific about what constitutes an advanced weapon system. Earth can operate within these parameters." The Krythian ambassador made a sound like grinding stones. His species' version of laughter. "The humans plan to throw rocks at our garrison? This is your grand strategy? Perhaps you will also shake your fists and make angry faces at us." A few other delegates made sounds of amusement. Claire did not react. She had expected this. "The treaty defines advanced weapons," she continued. "It lists specific technologies developed within the last 3,000 years. Energy projection systems. Electromagnetic acceleration. Guided explosive delivery. Chemical propellant firearms. The species who wrote this treaty were very thorough." "Your point?" the Arbiter asked. "My point is that the treaty says nothing about the weapons humanity used for thousands of years before we developed those technologies. Weapons we became very, very good at using." The Velori representative leaned forward. "I do not understand. What weapons existed before these?" Claire pulled up a holographic display from Earth's military history archives. Images appeared in the air above the council floor. Wooden and steel constructions that looked primitive to species who had been using energy weapons for millennia. "Before humans had guns, we had bows," Claire explained. "Before we had missiles, we had siege weapons. We spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other with mechanical systems that required no power source beyond muscle and physics." The Krythian studied the images, his eyes narrowing. "You cannot be serious. These are museum pieces. Historical curiosities." "The treaty calls them compliant weapons systems," Claire countered. "Section 7, paragraph 12 specifically exempts any weapon system that does not utilize energy projection, chemical propulsion, or electronic guidance. These weapons use none of those things." The Arbiter consulted with its fellow council members. Their discussion happened in ultrasonic frequencies too high for most species to hear, but Claire could see the uncertainty in their body language. Finally the Arbiter spoke. The human interpretation of the treaty appears to be technically correct. However, we must question the wisdom of this action. Your species risks much by entering a conflict against a superior military force with inferior weapons. Let us worry about that, Claire said. The Velori representative rose, hope breaking through her crystalline features like dawn light. If Earth is willing to help us, we accept gratefully. We have nowhere else to turn. Then it is decided, the Arbiter declared. Earth will deploy defensive forces to the Velori colonies under strict treaty compliance. You have 30 standard cycles to mobilize. Any violation of the treaty restrictions will result in immediate sanctions against humanity and withdrawal of your forces. Is this understood? Perfectly understood, Claire confirmed. The Krythian ambassador pointed one clawed finger at her. You doom your soldiers to pointless death, human. Our shields will stop whatever primitive projectiles you launch. Our armor will turn your wooden arrows to splinters. When your people are defeated, remember that you chose this humiliation. Claire met his gaze without flinching. There's an old saying on Earth. Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. You should have studied ours more carefully. The session adjourned and delegates began filing out. The Velori representative hurried to Claire's side, her crystalline hands clasped together. Can you truly help us with such limitations? She asked quietly. I am grateful, but I do not wish for your people to die in vain. Claire placed a reassuring hand on the Velori's shoulder, feeling the smooth cool surface beneath her palm. My people have another saying. Just because something is old doesn't mean it's obsolete. The Krythians have forgotten what war looked like before energy weapons. They've forgotten what it means to face an enemy that doesn't fight fair by modern standards. She pulled up her communication device and began composing an encrypted message to Earth Command. The Krythians think they know what's coming. They think they understand human history. But there's a difference between reading about medieval warfare in a database and actually experiencing it. The Velori tilted her head in confusion. What difference? Claire smiled as she sent the message. Terror. Humans spent thousands of years learning how to hurt each other in ways that technology has made people forget. We're about to give the galaxy a very practical history lesson. As she walked out of the council chamber, Claire thought about the arsenal already being prepared back on Earth. Crossbows with carbon fiber strings. Longbows made from advanced composites. Trebuchets built with engineering precision that medieval craftsmen could never have achieved. Old weapons, yes, but made with new materials and guided by minds that understood exactly how to exploit every weakness in modern galactic warfare. The Krythians were in for a very unpleasant surprise. The transport ships descended through the atmosphere of Velori Prime, their hulls gleaming in the light of the system's twin suns. Colonel Derek Walsh stood at the viewport, watching the peaceful blue and green world grow larger. Somewhere down there, Krythian forces had established a forward operating base, their weapons pointed at civilian settlements. Derek was 45 years old, a career soldier who had served in conflicts across 3 different star systems. But he had never expected to command a force armed with weapons his ancestors had used 1,000 years ago. Behind him, the cargo holds were filled with equipment that would have looked at home in a medieval castle. Sir, we're getting a transmission from the Krythian base, his communications officer said. They want to talk. Put it through, Derek replied. A holographic image appeared, showing a Krythian commander in full battle armor. The alien's scaled face twisted into what might have been a smirk. So, the humans have arrived. We detected your ships. No energy signatures from weapons systems. No railgun capacitors. No missile guidance signals. What exactly did you bring, Colonel? Harsh language. Derek kept his expression neutral. We brought what we needed. We have been watching your cargo transfers, the Krythian continued. Wooden constructions. Metal frames. Did Earth send us their circus equipment by mistake? Other Krythian officers in the background made rumbling sounds of amusement. You'll see soon enough, Derek said calmly. In the meantime, I'm required to inform you that you have violated neutral territory. Withdraw your forces within 24 hours or we will remove you. The Krythian commander laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. With what? Bows and arrows? Please, human, do try. We could all use the entertainment. The transmission cut off. Derek turned to his second-in-command, Captain Lisa Morgan. How long until we're fully deployed? 6 hours for complete setup, Lisa replied. She was younger than Derek, sharp-eyed and efficient. The engineers are already assembling the trebuchets. Infantry units are checking their equipment. Good. Make sure every soldier understands the mission parameters. We hit them at dawn. As night fell over the Velori landscape, Derek walked through the human encampment. Soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, preparing weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum. But these were not simple wooden bows and stone-throwing catapults. He stopped at one weapon station where Sergeant Tom Fletcher was instructing his unit on the crossbows. The weapons looked medieval at first glance, but Derek could see the differences. The bow arms were made from carbon fiber composite, stronger than steel and far more flexible than wood. The strings were synthetic polymers that could handle thousands of shots without fraying. "Show me," Derek said. Tom loaded a bolt into his crossbow. The projectile was sleek, aerodynamic, with a tungsten carbide tip that gleamed in the artificial light. "These bolts are designed with armor penetration in mind, sir. The Krythians use personal shields calibrated to deflect energy weapons. They work by detecting the electromagnetic signature and creating a counterfield. But these bolts?" He patted the crossbow affectionately. "No electronics. No energy signature. Nothing for their shields to detect." "Range?" Derek asked. "Effective killing range of 400 meters with the scopes we've mounted. Accuracy within 2 centimeters at that distance. Silent operation. No muzzle flash. No heat signature." Derek nodded, impressed. "And the trebuchets? You'll want to see those yourself, sir." They walked to the edge of camp where the siege weapons stood against the darkening sky. They were enormous, 10 meters tall, built from titanium alloy frames instead of wood. The counterweights were solid blocks of depleted uranium, giving them the mass needed for maximum throwing distance. Lieutenant Ben Carter supervised the engineering team making final adjustments. "We're ready for live fire testing, sir. We've calculated trajectories for the Krythian base. Range is approximately 2 kilometers. "What are we throwing?" Derek asked. Ben smiled. "For the first bombardment, we're using simple kinetic projectiles. 50-kilogram tungsten spheres. After that, we have incendiary packages, biological irritants, and some special surprises the R&D team cooked up." "Nothing that violates the treaty," Derek warned. "Nothing at all, sir. No explosives. No chemical propellants. Just gravity, physics, and some very angry humans with good aim." As midnight approached, Derek gathered his command staff for final briefing. They sat in a portable shelter, holographic maps showing the Krythian position. "The enemy has approximately 300 soldiers garrisoning a fortified position," Derek explained. "They have energy shields protecting the base perimeter and personal shields on every soldier. Their armor is designed to disperse energy weapon impacts. They're expecting a conventional assault and they're confident their defenses will hold." Lisa leaned forward, studying the map. "What they're not expecting is kinetic warfare. Their shields are useless against physical projectiles moving at subsonic speeds." "Exactly," Derek confirmed. "At 0400 hours, we begin artillery bombardment. The trebuchets will target their command center and power generators. Simultaneously, crossbow teams will take up positions within 400 meters of their perimeter. Any Krythian who shows themselves becomes a target." "Rules of engagement?" Tom asked. "Disable if possible, eliminate if necessary. The treaty allows for defensive force. We're defending Velori territory." Derek looked around the table at his officers. "I know this seems strange. Fighting with weapons our ancestors abandoned centuries ago. But those ancestors were very good at this. They fought wars for thousands of years with these tools. We're going to show the galaxy why humans dominated their own world long before they reached the stars." Dawn came cold and clear. Derek stood on a hill overlooking the battlefield, watching through high-powered optics as the Krythian base came to life with morning activity. Behind him, the trebuchet crews made final calculations. "Range confirmed," Ben reported. "Wind speed accounted for. Trajectory locked." "Fire," Derek ordered. The first trebuchet released with a tremendous crack of counterweight hitting frame. The tungsten sphere arced through the air, a dark speck against the brightening sky. Derek tracked it through his optics, watching as it reached the apex of its flight and began to fall. The Krythian base had energy shields, shimmering barriers designed to stop plasma bolts and laser fire. The tungsten sphere passed through them like they didn't exist. It struck the command building with devastating force, punching through the roof and continuing down through multiple floors. Alarms began wailing from the Krythian base. Soldiers poured out of barracks looking confused. Their commanders were shouting orders, trying to understand what had happened. "All trebuchets, fire at will," Derek commanded. The sky filled with projectiles. Tungsten spheres. Incendiary packages wrapped in cloth that ignited from air friction. Clay pots filled with irritating compounds that shattered on impact, spreading their contents across the base. The Krythians activated their shields to full power, but it made no difference. Every projectile sailed through the energy barriers and struck with brutal efficiency. Buildings collapsed. Equipment was destroyed. The base that had seemed so impregnable minutes ago was being torn apart by weapons that predated spaceflight. A Krythian commander appeared on the communication channel, his image flickering. "What are you doing? What weapons are these?" "The kind your shields can't stop," Derek replied. "The kind your armor wasn't designed for. The kind that humans perfected long before we met you." On the ground, crossbow teams opened fire. Krythian soldiers who tried to form defensive lines found themselves hit by bolts traveling at 300 meters per second. The tungsten tips punched through their armor plating, which had been engineered to disperse heat and deflect energy, but had no defense against simple kinetic penetration. The Krythians tried to return fire with their energy weapons, but the human forces had already displaced to new positions. Crossbows made no sound, produced no muzzle flash, left no heat signature. The Krythians were fighting an enemy they couldn't track with their advanced sensors. Within 2 hours, the Krythian base was in chaos. Their shields were useless. Their armor was failing. Their weapons couldn't find targets. And the bombardment continued without pause, each trebuchet throwing projectiles every 3 minutes like clockwork. Derek watched through his optics as Krythian soldiers began abandoning their positions, retreating deeper into their fortified buildings. They were learning the same lesson humans had learned centuries ago. Sometimes the simplest weapons are the hardest to defend against. "Sir, we're receiving surrender signals from 3 Krythian units," Lisa reported. "Negative," Derek said. "Not yet. They need to understand this completely." He activated the communication channel. "Krythian forces, this is Colonel Walsh. What you're experiencing is called siege warfare. Humans practiced it for thousands of years. We got very good at it. This is just the beginning. Surrender now or learn what else we brought." The bombardment continued, and the Krythians began to truly understand their mistake. The Krythian forces pulled back to their main garrison as the sun reached its highest point. Derek watched through his tactical display as the aliens abandoned their outer positions and consolidated behind the thick walls of their fortress. The structure was impressive, built with standard Galactic Council military specifications. Energy shields covered every approach. Automated defense turrets lined the walls. Supply bunkers were buried deep underground. "They think they're safe now," Lisa said, standing beside Derek at the command post. "They are safe from conventional assault," Derek admitted. "Those walls would stop any ground force. The shields would absorb weeks of energy weapon fire. If we had brought normal weapons, they could sit in there for months waiting for relief." "But we didn't bring normal weapons," Lisa finished. "No, we didn't." Derek pulled up the siege plan on his tablet. "Give me Sergeant Fletcher and Lieutenant Carter. It's time to show them what a real siege looks like." Within the hour, human forces had completely surrounded the Krythian garrison. Tom's crossbow teams took up positions in the hills overlooking the fortress, hidden among rocks and vegetation. Ben's trebuchet crews established firing positions at maximum range, where Krythian energy weapons couldn't reach them effectively. Inside the garrison, the Krythian commander broadcast on an open channel. "Humans, you have made your point. You have new tricks with old weapons. But now we are behind proper fortifications. Your wooden throwing machines cannot breach these walls. Your arrows cannot reach us here. You will grow tired of this game and leave, or we will call for reinforcements." Derek smiled as he activated his response. "Commander, you're thinking like someone who has only known modern warfare. Let me teach you about history." He gave the signal. The trebuchets opened fire. The first volley was different from the morning bombardment. Instead of solid tungsten spheres, the projectiles were clay pots wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. As they arced through the air, friction ignited the cloth. Flaming containers sailed over the fortress walls, smashing against buildings and spreading burning liquid across the compound. The Krythian shields flickered uselessly as the fire projectiles passed through them. The automated defense turrets, calibrated to track high-speed missiles and energy bolts, couldn't lock onto the slow-moving, ballistic trajectory projectiles. "All units maintain continuous fire," Derek ordered. "Rotate ammunition types every 4th shot." The bombardment became systematic and relentless. Incendiary pots to spread fire. Heavy stones to damage structures. Clay spheres filled with a mixture that released thick, choking smoke when broken. Containers of waste that made areas of the base uninhabitable with their smell. The Krythians activated their emergency protocols. Energy shields went to maximum power. Fire suppression systems engaged. Soldiers in protective gear tried to clean contaminated areas. But every 3 minutes, another volley arrived. The defenders couldn't keep up. Tom's crossbow teams began their work as Krythian sentries appeared on the walls, trying to spot the human positions. The first sentry never saw what hit him. A carbon fiber bolt traveled silently through the air and struck him in the center of his chest plate. The tungsten tip punched through the armor designed to deflect laser fire. The sentry fell without making a sound. Confirmed kill at 380 meters, Tom reported quietly into his radio. Target 2 tracking. Another sentry dropped. Then another. The Krythians realized their wall positions were no longer safe and pulled their soldiers inside. But that meant they were blind to human movements. Night fell and the bombardment continued. Derek had calculated the psychological impact carefully. Humans had used siege warfare for millennia. They understood that the waiting, the constant threat, the inability to stop the attacks wore down defenders faster than any direct assault. Inside the garrison, Krythian soldiers huddled in bunkers, listening to the regular crash of projectiles hitting their base. Every 3 minutes, like clockwork, another impact. They couldn't sleep. They couldn't relax. They couldn't stop it. The Krythian commander tried to adapt. He sent out a patrol to locate the Trebuchets and call down artillery strikes. Derek had anticipated this. The patrol made it 200 meters from the fortress before crossbow bolts began hitting them from multiple directions. The Krythians' thermal sensors detected nothing. Their motion detectors were useless against humans who moved slowly and carefully. 6 soldiers went down before the patrol retreated in confusion. "They're learning they can't leave the base," Lisa observed. "That's the point," Derek said. "In medieval siege warfare, the castle walls that protected you also became your prison. They have food and water for maybe 2 weeks. We can keep this up for months." On the 3rd day of the siege, Derek introduced a new ammunition type. The Trebuchets launched large cloth bags that burst open in midair, releasing thousands of small metal fragments. The fragments rained down across the base, shredding exposed equipment, damaging solar panels, and forcing the Krythians to stay under cover constantly. The Krythian commander sent an encrypted message to his fleet, requesting immediate extraction. Derek's intelligence team intercepted and decoded it easily. The response came back, negative. The fleet couldn't risk entering the system while human forces held the orbital high ground with their own ships. The garrison was on its own. Ben approached Derek on the morning of the 4th day. "Sir, we're running low on incendiary ammunition. But I have an idea that's, well, it's pretty medieval." "Show me," Derek said. Ben pulled up historical references on his tablet. Ancient armies used to launch disease-carrying material into besieged cities. "We can't use biological weapons under the treaty, but we can use natural decomposition. We've been collecting waste from our own camp. If we launch it over their walls, the smell alone will make parts of their base unusable. It's disgusting, but it's not illegal." Derek considered this. It was harsh, but siege warfare had never been gentle. "Do it. But keep it away from their water supply. We're not trying to actually make them sick, just miserable." The new bombardment began. Krythian soldiers inside the garrison found their courtyard and common areas becoming unbearable. They had to seal themselves in interior rooms, which meant even less space for the trapped force. Morale collapsed. Discipline began to fray. Sergeant Maria Santos led a night reconnaissance mission, crawling to within 50 meters of the fortress walls. She reported back that she could hear Krythian soldiers arguing, some demanding they surrender, others insisting they hold out for relief that wasn't coming. On the 6th day, a group of Krythian soldiers attempted to break out. They formed up in their heaviest armor and charged the eastern perimeter, hoping to punch through the human lines and escape into the wilderness. Tom's crossbow teams were waiting. The Krythians ran straight into a storm of silent bolts. Their armor, designed for energy weapons, provided almost no protection. Half the group went down in the first 30 seconds. The rest retreated, carrying their wounded back to the fortress. Derek made sure that footage of the failed breakout was transmitted on open channels. He wanted other Krythian forces to see what was happening. He wanted the entire galaxy to understand. Inside the garrison, the situation became desperate. Fires still burned in several buildings from the incendiary bombardments. Waste contaminated large sections of the compound. Medical supplies were running low, with dozens of wounded from crossbow strikes. The constant bombardment meant no one could sleep properly. Food was being rationed. The Krythian commander appeared on the communication channel on the 7th day. His image was haggard, his scales dull. Colonel Walsh, I wish to discuss terms. The terms are simple, Derek replied. Complete surrender. Your soldiers will be treated as prisoners of war according to Galactic Council protocols. You have 1 hour to decide. You have not breached our walls, the Krythian said, trying to salvage some dignity. We could hold longer. Could you? Derek asked. Your shields are useless. Your walls protect you from energy weapons we don't have. Your supplies are limited. Your soldiers are exhausted. And we can keep throwing rocks at you for as long as necessary. He paused. Your ancestors would have understood this situation immediately. Yours is the first generation in thousands of years that forgot what siege warfare truly means. The Krythian commander looked off-screen, consulting with his officers. When he turned back, his posture showed defeat. We surrender. 1 hour. We will open the main gates and lay down our weapons. Derek nodded. Wise choice. As the human forces moved in to secure the garrison, soldiers from other species who had been observing from orbit sent shocked reports back to their governments. The humans had won without firing a single energy weapon. They had defeated a fortified position using weapons that most species considered primitive curiosities. The Treaty of Restricted Arms had been designed to prevent escalation, to keep warfare controlled and civilized. The authors had never imagined that someone would go backward through military history to find solutions they hadn't banned. Derek stood in the garrison courtyard as Krythian soldiers filed out, their weapons in neat piles. He thought about all the human generals throughout history who had perfected siege warfare. They would have been proud. Sometimes the old ways worked best. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson thoroughly. The news of the garrison's surrender traveled across the galaxy faster than the fastest ships. On 1,000 worlds, military commanders watched recordings of the siege with disbelief. On council worlds, politicians debated what it meant. And in every Krythian military base, soldiers watched their comrades surrender to humans carrying wooden bows. But 3 Krythian strongholds remained on Velori Prime, each one commanded by officers who refused to believe what they had seen. The largest was Fortress Carthax, home to nearly 500 Krythian soldiers led by General Vorn, a decorated warrior with 30 years of combat experience. They got lucky, Vorn told his officers as they gathered in the command center. One garrison fell because they were unprepared. We are not unprepared. We know what weapons the humans carry. We will not make the same mistakes. Derek received the intelligence report about Vorn's defiance with interest. He sat in his temporary headquarters, studying the fortress layout. Lisa stood nearby, reviewing casualty reports from the first siege. They had won without losing a single human soldier. Vorn is experienced, Lisa said. He's already modified his defensive positions. Look at these satellite images. He's pulled all his sentries inside. He's covered exposed areas. He's expecting the same siege tactics we used before. Then we won't give him the same siege, Derek replied. He pulled up files from Earth's military history archives, searching through thousands of years of warfare. Every culture on Earth developed their own approach to combat. The siege tactics we used were European medieval strategy. But humans fought wars on every continent, in every climate, with every possible variation of these weapons. He found what he was looking for and smiled. Give me Tom and his crossbow teams. And find me every soldier who has training in stealth operations. That night, as Velori Prime's twin moons rose above the horizon, Tom led 50 soldiers toward Fortress Carthax. They moved slowly, carefully, using natural terrain to mask their approach. Each soldier carried a crossbow and wore dark clothing that broke up their silhouette. Their faces were painted with patterns that confused thermal imaging. They stopped 300 meters from the fortress walls. Tom studied the defenses through his night vision scope. Vorn had indeed learned from the previous siege. The walls were well guarded, but all the guards were behind cover. No exposed sentries to pick off. Phase 1, Tom whispered into his radio. The soldiers loaded special bolts into their crossbows. These bolts had cloth wrapped around the shaft, soaked in a chemical compound that burned bright and hot when ignited. Tom lit the first one and took careful aim at the fortress wall. The flaming bolt arced through the darkness and struck stone. It stuck there, burning brightly. Another followed. Then another. Soon, dozens of flames dotted the fortress walls, casting dancing shadows across the compound. Inside, Krythian soldiers stared at the lights in confusion. Their sensors detected no energy weapons. No explosives. Just fire. What were the humans doing? Phase 2, Tom ordered. Half his team began firing regular bolts at random intervals. The bolts struck walls, hit the ground in the courtyard, embedded in wooden structures. None of them hit Krythian soldiers because that wasn't the point. The point was the sound. Every few seconds, another bolt would strike somewhere in the fortress with a sharp crack or thud. Sometimes from one direction, sometimes from another. The Krythian soldiers couldn't see where the bolts were coming from. Their thermal sensors showed no muzzle flashes. Their audio sensors couldn't track the source because crossbows made almost no sound. They just knew that every few seconds something hit their base and they couldn't stop it. General Vorn ordered his soldiers to stay calm and remain at their posts. But as the night wore on and the random strikes continued, never stopping, never predictable, his troops began to flinch at every sound. Derek had studied the psychology carefully. Modern soldiers were trained for intense, short battles. Energy weapons meant fights lasted minutes or even seconds. You either won quickly or died quickly. But this was different. This was constant, low-level threat with no clear beginning or end. It wore down the mind. At midnight, Tom's teams withdrew silently. The Krythian soldiers waited for the next attack, weapons ready, nerves stretched tight. Nothing happened. An hour passed. 2 hours. Still nothing. Then just before dawn, the flaming arrows began again. This time, Derek had positioned trebuchets in range. But he didn't launch the heavy bombardments like before. Instead, every 10 minutes, a single projectile would arc over the fortress. Sometimes it was a stone that crashed into the courtyard. Sometimes it was an incendiary that spread fire. Sometimes it was just a clay pot that shattered harmlessly. The Krythians could see these projectiles coming. The large stones moved slowly enough that soldiers could watch them arc through the sky, following the ballistic path toward the fortress. They had several seconds to see death approaching and know they couldn't stop it. One stone landed near a barracks, missing it by 5 meters. The soldiers inside had watched it fall, not knowing if it would hit them or not. Another landed in an ammunition storage area, destroying supplies but hurting no one. The randomness was intentional. The Krythians never knew if the next projectile would kill them or miss completely. By the third day, General Vorn's soldiers were exhausted. They couldn't sleep because they never knew when the next attack would come. Some happened during the day. Some at night. Sometimes hours apart. Sometimes minutes. The human forces had created a rhythm of fear with no pattern to predict. Sergeant Maria Santos led the night raids. Her team would approach the fortress in darkness, fire a volley of bolts at nothing in particular, then disappear before the Krythians could respond. Sometimes they would bang metal objects together to make noise. Sometimes they would shout insults in broken Krythian language. Sometimes they would just let a single flaming arrow fly high into the air, visible from anywhere in the fortress, a reminder that the humans were always watching. The psychological impact was devastating. Krythian soldiers began reporting to their medical officer with stress symptoms. Some refused to leave their bunkers. Others jumped at shadows. General Vorn tried to maintain discipline, but he could see his command crumbling. On the 4th night, Derek authorized a new tactic. Tom's team surrounded the fortress and at exactly midnight, every soldier fired a flaming arrow straight up into the air. Hundreds of burning projectiles rose into the darkness, reached their apex and began to fall toward the fortress. The Krythians watched in horror as fire rained from the sky. Most of the arrows landed harmlessly, but the visual effect was terrifying. The entire fortress seemed to be under attack from every direction at once. Soldiers screamed and ran for cover. Some fired their energy weapons wildly at nothing. When the last arrow fell and silence returned, the Krythian soldiers huddled in their shelters, shaking. They had faced energy weapons in a dozen battles and never broken. But this was different. This was primal fear that bypassed their training and touched something deep in their evolutionary memory. Across the galaxy, military observers watched the footage with growing unease. The humans weren't just winning battles. They were introducing psychological warfare that hadn't been seen in civilized space for thousands of years. On the Council homeworld, delegates gathered for an emergency session. The Velori representative stood before them, her crystalline form reflecting the chamber lights. The humans are not violating the treaty, she said. But they are changing warfare itself. They have remembered tactics we thought were ancient history. They have weaponized fear in ways we had forgotten were possible. The Arbiter consulted its records. In 3,000 years of galactic conflict under the treaty, no species has employed siege warfare, psychological tactics, or sustained harassment campaigns. These methods were abandoned as inefficient. Inefficient. A delegate from a peaceful trading species spoke up. The humans have taken 3 fortified positions without losing a single soldier. The Krythians have hundreds of casualties and thousands more suffering from stress disorders. How is this inefficient? Another delegate raised a tentacle. My government has reviewed Earth's military history. Do you know how long humans practice these tactics? Not decades. Not centuries. Thousands of years. Every culture on their world developed variations. They have more institutional knowledge about pre-technological warfare than the rest of the galaxy combined. On Velori Prime, General Vorn finally accepted reality on the 6th day. He watched his soldiers flinch at every sound, saw them unable to eat or sleep properly, and knew he had lost. Not because his fortress had been breached, but because his army had been broken without the humans ever launching a full assault. He opened a communication channel to Derek. Colonel Walsh, I request terms of surrender. Derek appeared on the screen looking rested and calm. The contrast with Vorn's haggard appearance was striking. General, your soldiers will be treated with respect. We take no pleasure in their suffering. Lay down your weapons and this ends immediately. Why? Vorn asked. Why fight this way? You have technology. You have ships. Why use these ancient methods? Derek considered the question. Because modern warfare assumes everyone fights the same way. Energy weapons. Shields. Electronic targeting. You all forgot that warfare existed for thousands of years before those technologies. My ancestors fought with these weapons when they lived in caves. They were very, very good at it. And all that knowledge still exists. We just had to remember it. Within hours, Fortress Carthax surrendered. The remaining 2 Krythian strongholds followed the next day, their commanders unwilling to endure what Vorn's soldiers had experienced. The Velori people were free. Not a single human soldier had died in the campaign. And across the galaxy, every military commander began pulling old Earth history files from their archives, trying to understand what humans had known all along. War wasn't about having the most advanced technology. It was about understanding fear, exhaustion, and the breaking point of the mind. Humans had spent 10,000 years learning those lessons. The galaxy had forgotten them. Now they were being taught again, one flaming arrow at a time. The Galactic Council chamber filled with representatives from 40 different species, all talking at once. Holographic displays showed footage from Velori Prime. Humans with wooden bows, ancient siege weapons throwing stones, and Krythian forces surrendering without their fortresses ever being breached. The noise level was unprecedented. The Arbiter raised multiple appendages, calling for order. We will proceed in an organized manner. The emergency session will now begin. Ambassador Claire Bennett sat calmly in the human delegation section, her hands folded on the table. Around her, other delegates shot angry glances in her direction. Some looked afraid. Others seemed fascinated. The Krythian ambassador stood first, his scales darker than usual, a sign of deep anger in his species. The humans have made a mockery of modern warfare. They have humiliated our military forces with primitive weapons. They have introduced psychological torture that violates the spirit of civilized combat. This cannot be allowed to continue. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. A delegate from the Zendari collective spoke next. We have reviewed the tactics employed by human forces. Night raids designed to prevent sleep. Random bombardments creating constant fear. Flaming projectiles that serve no purpose except to terrify. These are not the methods of a civilized species. Claire remained seated, waiting. She had expected this reaction. The Velori representative rose, her crystalline form catching the light. I must speak in defense of Earth. The humans liberated our colonies. They did so without violating a single word of the treaty. Not one clause. Not one restriction. They followed the law perfectly. The law has a spirit as well as a letter, the Arbiter said carefully. The Treaty of Restricted Arms was designed to make warfare more humane, to prevent unnecessary suffering, to limit civilian casualties. And we achieved all of that, Claire said, finally standing. 0 civilian casualties. 0 collateral damage to Velori infrastructure. The only casualties were Krythian military personnel who invaded neutral territory in violation of Council law. And the majority of those casualties were treated and survived. She activated her data tablet, and statistics appeared on the main display. Krythian casualties, 237 wounded, 43 killed in combat. For comparison, a conventional assault on those fortified positions would have required orbital bombardment or ground assaults that would have killed thousands. On both sides. The Zendari delegate wasn't satisfied. You terrorized soldiers who had surrendered to superior positions. You denied them sleep. You created psychological trauma that will affect them for years. Yes, Claire agreed simply. That's what siege warfare is. That's what war was for humans for thousands of years. It wasn't clean. It wasn't quick. It was brutal and psychological and designed to break the enemy's will to fight. But it was also effective at achieving military objectives with minimum loss of life. A new voice spoke up. The delegate from the Harmony Worlds, a species known for their philosophical approach to conflict. Ambassador Bennett, I think we understand your argument. You followed the letter of the law. But surely you can see why this troubles the Council. We have spent millennia trying to make warfare less traumatic, more controlled, more civilized. Claire nodded slowly. I appreciate that goal. But in doing so you made assumptions. You assumed that energy weapons were more humane than crossbows. You assumed that quick battles were better than long sieges. You assumed that advanced technology meant advanced ethics. Those assumptions were wrong. She pulled up more data. Look at casualty rates from galactic conflicts over the last 1,000 years. Even with all your treaties and restrictions, wars using energy weapons kill millions. Cities are destroyed. Planets are devastated. You made warfare faster, but you didn't make it less deadly. You just made it less personal. The chamber fell quiet. Derek had transmitted his after-action reports, and Claire had studied them carefully. The truth was uncomfortable but clear. Humans used these weapons for 10,000 years, Claire continued. We learned what they could do. We learned their limitations. And most importantly, we learned that when warfare is slow, when soldiers can see projectiles coming, when the enemy is close enough to hear and see, people become very eager to find peaceful solutions. Quick wars with energy weapons are easy to start. Siege warfare? Nobody wants that. It's miserable for everyone involved. The Krythian ambassador growled. Are you suggesting your primitive methods are superior to modern military science? I'm suggesting they're different, Claire replied. And in situations where the treaty restricts modern weapons, yes, they're superior. Because we never forgot them. Every other species in this chamber abandoned these tactics thousands of years ago. You put them in museums and forgot they were ever real. Humans remember. The Arbiter consulted with its fellow council members. Their discussion lasted several minutes while the chamber waited in tense silence. Finally the Arbiter spoke. Ambassador Bennett, the Council acknowledges that Earth violated no treaty provisions. However, your interpretation has revealed significant gaps in our military agreements. The treaty was written assuming certain technological baselines that humans do not share. Then the treaty needs to be rewritten, Claire said. Which is exactly what I'm going to recommend to my government. Work with us. Use human military historians as consultants. We can help you understand the thousands of years of warfare you've forgotten. We can help you write better, more comprehensive treaties. A delegate from a species Claire didn't recognize spoke up. And if we refuse? If we simply ban humans from participating in future conflicts? Claire smiled without humor. You could try. But other species will want to learn these tactics now. The footage from Velori Prime has been broadcast across the galaxy. Military commanders on 100 worlds are already requesting information about human warfare history. You can ban Earth from conflicts, but you can't ban the knowledge. It's out now. She was right, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The recordings of crossbow teams taking down armored soldiers, of trebuchets destroying fortified positions, of psychological warfare breaking enemy morale had spread everywhere. Military academies were already downloading Earth's historical archives. The Harmony Worlds delegate stood again. Perhaps this is not a crisis but an opportunity. The humans have reminded us that warfare exists on many levels. That technology is not the only factor. That history matters. I propose we establish a joint commission with human military experts to review and update our treaties. The Arbiter considered this. A reasonable suggestion. Ambassador Bennett, would Earth be willing to participate in such a commission? Absolutely, Claire said. On one condition. The Velori colonies remain under Earth protection until the Krythians formally withdraw their territorial claims. The Krythian ambassador started to object, but the Arbiter silenced him. Given recent events, that seems appropriate. The Krythians will withdraw all claims to Velori space. Earth will maintain a defensive presence for 1 standard year. During that time, the Treaty Commission will work to update our military agreements. Over the next 6 months, human military historians worked with Council legal experts to rewrite major sections of the Treaty of Restricted Arms. The new version included provisions for siege weapons, projectile warfare, and psychological tactics. It also included restrictions on sustained harassment and rules about prisoner treatment that specifically addressed the tactics humans had employed. Derek was invited to present to the Council Military Advisory Committee. He stood before the assembled military commanders from dozens of species and taught them about warfare their civilizations had forgotten. Crossbow mechanics, trebuchet mathematics, the psychology of siege warfare, the importance of morale and mental endurance. Some resented the lessons. Others embraced them eagerly. But everyone learned. On Velori Prime, a monument was erected outside the surrendered Krythian fortress. It showed a human soldier with a crossbow standing beside a Velori civilian. The inscription read, "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Sometimes remembering is more powerful than inventing." Humanity taught us this lesson with patience and skill. Claire stood before the monument during the dedication ceremony, Derek beside her in his dress uniform. The Velori had thrown a celebration that lasted 3 days. Every human soldier received honors from the Velori government. "Do you think we changed anything?" Derek asked quietly. Claire watched the crowd of Velori citizens, their crystalline forms dancing with reflected light. "We reminded the galaxy that history matters. That just because something is old doesn't mean it's obsolete. That humans learned hard lessons over thousands of years, and those lessons still have value." She paused then smiled. "And we proved that Earth can hold its own in galactic politics. Not because we have the best technology or the biggest fleet, but because we remember things others have forgotten. That's going to matter a lot in the years ahead." News broadcasts across the galaxy told the story differently depending on the audience. Some called it human cunning. Others called it human savagery. A few called it genius. But everyone agreed on one thing: humanity had changed galactic warfare forever. Not with new inventions or advanced technology, but by reaching into their past and pulling out weapons that still worked perfectly well. By remembering what their ancestors knew. By understanding that progress sometimes means looking backward instead of forward. Military academies added new courses about pre-technological warfare. Arms manufacturers began producing modern versions of ancient weapons. Tacticians studied Earth's military history with the same intensity they studied quantum physics and energy weapon design. And on Earth, in military museums around the world, old weapons that had hung on walls for centuries were carefully taken down, studied, and appreciated in new ways. Crossbows, longbows, trebuchets, catapults. Tools that had won 1,000 battles on humanity's home world, and now had won battles among the stars. The galaxy had forgotten that warfare existed before energy weapons and faster-than-light travel. Humans had not forgotten. And in the moment the Krythians needed to learn that lesson, humanity had been ready to teach it. With a crossbow bolt, a flaming arrow, and a stone thrown by an ancient machine that their ancestors would have recognized instantly.